I'll keep an eye on the fuel and the oil, but I'll turn this thing over. Okay, I don't see anything leaking. So this is a good position to have it in to take a look. All right, next thing I want to do is I want to remove some of these sheet metal screws. It looks like there's about 6 of them, and get this bottom plate off so we can take a look at what's going on inside. All right, I'm using a 3/8 socket. Loosen all these up. On the 2 sides, it's going to be easier if I remove these wheels. You just got to remove that cotter pin. All right, those were pretty sticky, so I'll probably sand these down with some emery cloth before I put the wheels back on. But now we can continue taking off some of these bolts. Okay, so with that hardware removed, you should be able to slide this guy out. Wow, wasn't expecting that. Pretty good sized mouse nest in there. I'll get rid of that by the wood pile. All right, so I got all that cleaned up, and the good news is that there was no one currently living in there. Must have just been an old nest. But now we can take a closer look inside. All right, so with a little lighting in there, certainly having that mouse nest in there, I'm sure there was some material getting on the friction disc and causing it to just spin in place. But the thing I am noticing is that the friction wheel itself, that rubber layer, is so thin that I think it still makes sense to replace it. All right, so I'm trying to get a good angle on this. So the friction drive disc, this rubber going over it, is supposed to be a little more than 1/4 inch thick. Mine is pretty worn down. This thing's about 13 years old, and it is less than, I mean, that's less than 1/8 of an inch. So I'm gonna go ahead and order a new friction drive disc. And when it gets here, we will pull the old one out and get the new one in. This is the model number of mine. It's located right on the back of it. So mine's 92001. If you're working on a different model, look at that location to get your model number. All right, so we've got the new friction disc, and I will visually compare it to the old one before I start removing the old one. But the part number, and I'll put it in the description, 04743700. That's if you've got a 624E Ariens. So this is what the new one looks like. This wheel is much thicker than what's on mine now. So we will go ahead and start the installation of this guy. First thing I'm going to do is remove this cotter pin from the gear selector. With this pin removed, we'll be able to move this thing a little easier. With that disconnected, we'll be able to move the friction wheel around a little easier. Next, with the friction wheel in the middle, you're gonna move the two pins that are kind of restricting the movement of the friction wheel. So I've pulled the first one out and I'm using a needle nose for this, but there's one on the left and then there's one on the right. So pull those out. Next, using a 3/8 socket, we're gonna remove the bearing housing on the left side. Carefully remove this cover. And now we're going to slide this shaft. This is a critical step, so I want you to see it. When I pull the shaft through the left hole in the frame, you're going to see there's a washer underneath here and underneath here that keeps this thing evenly spaced. There's also a washer right between the gear and then the outside housing. So I'm gonna pull that out now, but you're gonna wanna pay attention to where there's washers and the placement on your machine. So let me swing that back and maybe I'll just pull it right here. So there's that one washer there, and then here's that bottom washer that's going to hold it in place there, and you can see the top washer. All right, so with my washers out of the way, I can kind of finagle this thing and I can get it out of there. All right, with this assembly removed, the last thing to do is to remove the actual friction disc from this shaft, and I'm going to use a T40 to remove these 3 bolts. So using my new friction disc, I'm going to try and line it up the exact same way. And it looks like that would be the way to do it. The holes line up nicely. So I will start these by hand. Just to make sure we don't cross thread anything. Just for good measure. Make sure those are nice and tight. So now you can see what a huge difference in the thickness of that friction wheel. At this point, we're in the home stretch, so I just want to show you the reassembly process. We're going to get this shaft in here. You want to put the washers on and then slide this black housing over the washer. And then remember, on mine, we had one washer that was up against the side of the machine where it fits into the bearing on the right side. So I'm going to put this thing together and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all done. Get that axle. So I kind of pushed it to the rear and then I can get it through that hole. So you're just kind of finagling things. All right, so with the friction wheel inside, now I'm going to replace that outside washer. And at the same time, I want to start trying to get my washers in place and start sliding it into place. Actually, I'll leave that one off for now. It's like a little puzzle. All right, so I've got the washers and the shifting mechanism in place. Now, before I slide that axle into the right side bearing, I want to put this washer back. I'm going to slide that onto the end carefully, and then I'm going to push it back. I got it in. All right, so the washer's in place, so the gear is positioned properly. I've got the washers in the right place for the shifter. Now I just need to reassemble the housing on the left side that holds that bearing on. Just carefully so that you don't move that shaft. So you don't want your washers to fall out of their placement. So we're going to put that in place. And we'll start with, we're going to do these by hand so we don't cross thread anything. And these are 3/8 hardware. Give it a good torque. Friction disc in place. Now I'm just gonna rotate this gear so that I can easily slide in these pins. Again, these make sure that the friction disc doesn't move too far. There's one on the left and one on the right. And again, you want to put your disc right in the middle so it's easy to slide these in. You might want to take your Apple Watch off so you don't crack it. There's one. Again, rotate it so you got a nice clear shot at that hole. And then it helps to hold the friction, or hold this gear. There we go. All right. Both pins are in place. Now I can go ahead and reattach this guy. I think I can do this one by hand. There we go. All right, so we've got the shifter back in place. The new friction wheel is on. The only thing left now is I'm going to put grease all over everything so everything slides nicely. I'm going to put the bottom back on and put the wheels back on. I think you guys know your way home from here. So I'm going to put some music on and wrap up this project. Hope this is helpful. You guys have a good day.